Is Nebraska headed into a different phase of its build under Matt Rhule? We'll discuss it next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. In today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. And here we go.
All right, welcome in. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. It's Wednesday. It's cold. It's cold outside in eastern Nebraska. Connor, it's like hoodie weather all of a sudden. It was 70 degrees this morning, and now the temperature is plummeting. We are headed toward November, Halloween, and it's going to get cold in Memorial Stadium. A little rain maybe on Saturday as the Huskers host UCLA. So
I like it.
I'm looking forward to it. We're going to dress for fall, not summer like we've been doing around here of late.
It's Big Ten football weather. Welcome to it, UCLA. It's what a perfect opponent to bring in for the first fall weather of the season.
Bruins are not going to get a real taste of November in the Big Ten North, but yeah, kind of. It's not. It's they're gonna probably need some extra layers on Saturday afternoon.
They don't get much rain in the 50s. That's for sure. That's definitely.
No.
You're right. It's not the full helping, but it's a nice little sampler platter.
We talked to Sierra Wright, the actor, yesterday, and he was looking forward to some Big Ten weather, being a guy from Los Angeles. So, yeah, Sierra Wright was on the stage Tuesday at Memorial Stadium, and so were the coordinators, Marcus Satterfield and Tony White. We'll discuss more later in the show of what those two had to say coming out of the Ohio State game, going into game number 9 for Nebraska. Somebody else, Ty Robinson, said something interesting, and I wrote about this today on The Athletic. He believes that Nebraska here in the 21st game under Matt Rhule, coming out of that performance against Ohio State on the heels of a 56-7 loss, has reached a tipping point, or it can see the tipping point. Like, is Nebraska about to kick down the door and have that door tip over? Or is this wishful thinking because Nebraska's trying to make the best of a situation where it's, again, on a losing streak after getting within one game of bowl eligibility?
Well, it's wishful thinking from the sense that we don't know yet. This is really where you find out. And I feel like we've said that a lot probably in the last, Matt Rhule's coached here 20 games now. We've probably said that a few times. It's like, oh, this is kind of the moment. And they've had some real ups and some real downs. But at this point, I can't trust Nebraska when they say, oh, this is the real us. This is the real us. Because we don't know. I mean, we have seen about as far apart of a spread as you can get over a 2-week period in games against Indiana and Ohio State. Is it this or is it this? And the Huskers are trying to tell us that it's more of the Ohio State game and less of the Indiana game. And I believe that it's closer to that than it is the Indiana game, but that's the standard they want to set for themselves, right? I mean, the game against Colorado or the first half or whatever against Colorado, like that's what they want to be. And we just haven't seen that consistently enough for us to say, okay, that's what they are. So it's wishful thinking for now. But these are 4 games that are all, 1 game, 2 games, 3 games, 4 games that are all winnable for Nebraska. And if they play like they did against Ohio State, or if they play like they did against Colorado. So I guess we're about to find out.
I want to pose this little thought experiment. I believe there are 2 times in Matt Rhule's 20-game stretch at Nebraska where the Huskers could have made a good argument that they had arrived at the, quote, tipping point that Ty Robinson referenced. One is the obvious after the Colorado game, or at halftime of the Colorado game this year. That's where it all looked great for 2 quarters, and I think there were thousands of people who said, "Oh my gosh, this is what they can be."
Yeah.
They've arrived. we saw the second half go a little bit downhill. Whatever, that's fine. You're up 28-0. But then Northern Iowa was lackluster, and Nebraska kind of trailed off even as it continued to win games until it went on the road and was blown out at Indiana. So
well, I mean, you had the Illinois game right after that too.
And for sure, yeah, it won 2 out of 3 after CU. And then the other moment, I think, where it was probably on the table came last year at this exact time, like this week last year. So Nebraska, after losing to Michigan big at home at the end of September, had a great October a year ago. Beat Illinois on the road. It beat Northwestern in a grimy game at Memorial Stadium, 17-9. And then it really operated pretty efficiently in a 31-14 win against Purdue. And that was the 3-game win streak that broke the long run of Nebraska not winning more than 2 games in a row. And it looked like, all right, I mean, you could have said this exact thing 1 year ago right now. Halloween 2023, Nebraska has reached a tipping point, and then it went on a 4-game losing streak.
And so those last 4 games were what? Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Iowa.
One, yeah.
And they lost them by 3 or 7 those entire last 4 games.
Yeah.
And so there are things that are a little bit different. I think the program from like a talent perspective is in a better place than it was a year ago. But it has to operate cleanly. So you're right. I mean, it's been 5-3 in this exact spot in back-to-back years. You feel like, all right, here we go. Now it's go time. And I think there's reason to believe that this one has some more staying power, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have the quarterback of the future and playmaker.
Yeah, they're not running an offense that's like being controlled with mirrors.
Exactly. That last year they were just trying to do anything they possibly could to make that work for them. So this has a little bit of a long road to it. Last year was just, you knew it was kind of going to be a one-off. But I don't know. Like, well, I genuinely don't know what we're going to get from Nebraska on Saturday. I guess it's maybe fortunate that you're playing the team that you're playing, although I don't want to make, they're 2-5. Their metrics look, horrible. They run the ball for 60 yards a game. UCLA does, but I don't know. We've seen bad teams, take it to Nebraska. So we'll see. It's a real put up or shut up time, I think, on that front.
Bruins have a dangerous quarterback, so that's definitely something to take into account here. He's a talented player, Ethan Garbers, but they've been inconsistent. Obviously, they're 2-5. We talked on our Tuesday show about the schedule that UCLA has played, so we won't get back into that. But it's been good. They're not going to be overwhelmed in any way by the environment in Lincoln or by the talent on the field for Nebraska. Robinson, he was insightful on Tuesday, and he actually, without being prompted, compared this game to that one on November 4th of 2023. Which when Nebraska was there, seemingly at this tipping point, like, okay, let's knock the door down. Let's do it. Let's get bowl eligible on the road against Michigan State. And that was a Michigan State team that was reeling at the time that Nebraska played the Spartans right then. You had a lame duck, coaching situation. And it's hard for me to even remember the specifics. Nebraska gave that game away in some way, much like it gave the game away a week later at home against Maryland. But
a couple bad turnovers, if I remember right.
Yeah, Ty said that this UCLA team might be comparable to Michigan State in that the Bruins come into Lincoln with not a whole lot to lose. At 2-5, you've kind of already been dragged through the bad part of your season, and getting bowl eligible at this point for UCLA is still out there, sure, but you're 2-5 coming into November. It's been a rough run. So why not just let it all loose? And I think that's what Nebraska saw last year against Michigan State. And there's a danger that the Huskers will face that same kind of wounded animal here on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, and I think this is a conversation that we can have tomorrow or Friday as Nebraska's on the doorstep of bowl eligibility. But we've wondered about how big of a deal that knocking down that wall would be for this program. Like, there's an argument to be made that once Nebraska gets the 6th win And especially if they do it in the second day of November, then, the sky's the limit, right? They'll have that monkey off their back, and then you just kind of go from there. So maybe that's the case, or maybe they slog through this month again. But man, it sets the table for a really, really interesting one.
Yeah, I want to come back after the break and talk one more thing. Talk about one more point that relates to this. Is Nebraska about to take a big step, or has Nebraska taken a big step? Conversation going back to something that Matt Rhule had to say after the game on Saturday at Ohio State, and we'll also get into Marcus Satterfield and what he had to say, how he continues to anger people without trying to in the Nebraska fan base. That's coming up after the break. But first, a reminder that our mailbag show is set for Thursday. So get your questions in. Ask us whatever you want to ask us about this football team, about whatever's going on in Lincoln that you'd like us to discuss. Whatever
Life
it is,
advice.
whatever what's that?
Life advice?
Life advice, yes. Whatever questions you might have, please send them to us on Twitter. You can find us at Locked On NEB. Or Mitch Sherman or Connor Happer. You can find us on email at lockedonneb@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube today, leave a question for the mailbag in the comments section below this show. We'll be back after this. All right, Mitch Sherman here to tell you about Game Time as the calendar flips to November. Can you believe it's basketball season? I can't believe it. Connor, can you believe it? You've been in some basketball arenas already.
It's hard to believe, but I do enjoy me some basketball. I can't wait to talk about basketball on this pod.
Okay, we'll mark that down. I have not been inside a basketball arena yet this season, but I'm looking forward to it because basketball, great basketball, matches the excitement of just about anything that you'll find in the sporting world. A shootout with two great teams trading threes. You got great defensive play, amazing plays happening. If you want to see it in person, Game Time will make getting tickets to basketball games, whether it's college or the NBA, so much easier. It offers shows not just for basketball, but for football, for concerts, for all sports and all things that aren't sports. Check out the feature of the Game Time app called Game Time Picks because it filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different options. How about the upcoming Creighton, Nebraska game? How about an NBA game that is outside of this market and can get you excited? Game Time allows you to customize your spot in the arena. I love that you can get curated deals to make it easier to find the best price on great seats. Game Time provides seat views before you buy. They've got this thing called the Super Deal. You need to check that out. It's a unique feature. Event cancellation protection, job loss protection. It's all there, and it's got a lowest price guarantee. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, the Game Time app. What time is it? It's game time.
All right, welcome back. Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone, Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Let's finish up the thought real quick on where Nebraska could go in the final month of the season here.
Yeah, so one thing that Rhule said that I maybe overlooked just a bit as his empirical evidence, his reason for believing that this tipping point, this time to kick down the door is here. He talked about the way that Nebraska reacted against Indiana when things went wrong and how the Huskers looked around the room and kind of wondered what's going on here. Like, here we go again. Are we the victim? That kind of stuff. And it opened a window just enough for Indiana to run through. And it was interesting to him and his observation after Ohio State that moment arrived again for Nebraska against Ohio State. It was in the second quarter. Nebraska was down 14-3. Ohio State had the ball. It had driven across midfield. It was getting the ball to come out of the half. You kind of felt like, all right, we're a couple plays away from this being 30-3 or something in that range. And Nebraska didn't blink. Nebraska got a defensive stop. It overcame some penalties. It kicked a field goal at the end of the first half. It got another defensive stop to start the second half and got the offense going. So it was like the exact opposite reaction if you're looking for one moment. And Rhule said that he believes that's the moment where he saw Nebraska grow up.
Yeah, I go back to his quote at the beginning of the year. I guess it was after the Illinois game when he mentioned like, hey, this is kind of what happens in year 2. You know, it goes up and there's this big and it feels like a burst, and then down and up again and down again and up again. You know, I don't know, according to his estimation, when it goes up and it stays up, you know, like
that's what he wants now.
That's what he hopes, the point that they're at right now. So I guess we'll see. It's exciting to think about if you think it's going that way, but they got 4 games to prove that it's going up and it's staying up.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Marcus Satterfield, Nebraska's offensive coordinator, came out on the stage on Tuesday, and he said that, he didn't know Dylan Raiola could run the way that Dylan Raiola ran in the first half against Ohio State on Saturday. Said he hadn't seen him do that. He was surprised. And low-hanging fruit, some Nebraska fans who were only looking to pile on the OC at this point were flabbergasted that Marcus Satterfield didn't know that his quarterback, who he's practiced with repeatedly since March, January, Dylan's been on campus, that he could run with the ball. Is this a legitimate thing to question Marcus Satterfield about?
Sounded like he said it in jest. Sounded like he was sort of joking, like, hey, I didn't know he could do that. But Marcus Satterfield is in a tough spot, like you mentioned right now, with just everybody, I think. And so when he says stuff like that, his jokes aren't necessarily taken as jokes anymore. I don't know. I'm not gonna pile on a guy for saying that he was surprised that the quarterback, who is not known for his running, busted off a 40-yard run in a huge game on Saturday. That was kind of surprising to everybody. I think everybody was watching the Dylan Raiola run, and he's running down the sideline.
I sure was
stiff arming a guy at the end, and they're like, "Whoa, I didn't know he had that in the bag there." So yeah, I'm not going to pile on him too much, but it's another check in the category for people who want to pile on him for sure.
Let's say Tony White did the same thing, and Tony White came out and Nebraska played one of its reserves. Caleb Benning, for instance, was on this trip on the 74-man roster, and he came in and made a huge play on special teams, forced a fumble, recovered a fumble, and Tony White got asked about it, and he said, "Yeah, I didn't know Caleb had that in him." Right there in that moment. We would not be criticizing Tony White for saying that. Now, he does have a top 20 defense, and Marcus Satterfield's offense is ranked 93rd in yards per game right now. Marcus Satterfield coaches the offense that has not won a game in which the defense allowed more than 14 points in the 20 games that Matt Rhule and Satterfield and Tony White have been running things at Nebraska. So some of the equity is just gone with Marcus Satterfield, and it's why I think you see the reaction to every little thing that he has to say up there occur when he talks on these Tuesdays. He made a reference as he walked off the stage on Tuesday that he was armed with all of these statistics, and he was disappointed that nobody asked him about yards per play in this media session. And that was a joke for sure. I don't know about the Dylan running thing.
That's awesome.
That was definitely a joke. I mean, I think he did have some numbers, but he was taking a light-hearted approach to it.
That would be funny if somebody asked him, "Hey, you know how many yards per play you're shooting for now?" And then he gets out a piece of paper and he unfolds it. He's like,
"Yeah." He said he memorized it. I was like, "Just bring a piece of paper, man. Like, get some stats printed up." But
that's awesome.
I would have liked him to start referencing without being asked. Nebraska's like second quarter EPA and all these advanced metrics. Hey, I got some things I wanted to go over here today. It would have been a nice little dig at everything that happened a week ago.
Honestly, that would have been a nice kind of icebreaker. Like, I think, hey,
I got a statement here I want to make.
Yeah, there's some tension there with just between him and everybody, I think, right now, like the fan base or the media, whatever. Like there's some tension there. So yeah, that would have been nice to break that through. But now, like, if you're taking him at face value and you're like, wow, I didn't know he had that in him. It's not like Dylan Raiola is scrambling to try and get yards, hard-earned yards in practice. Also, he's run for a few first downs this year. Like, he's pulled it and taken it down. So he has seen that. I think it was more sort of like a dig at, coaches and coaches barb their players barb their coaches all the time. It's like, whoa, I didn't know that was in them there. Might have to do that a little bit more. So yeah, I doesn't bother me that much.
It's a big nothing. Let's just agree on that.
Yeah.
So Dylan had some things to say about Satterfield too. Did you see those quotes?
I did. Yeah, he was Dylan loves to take responsibility. He, and he definitely like his coaches, he definitely knows what people are saying about them.
Yeah, so he said, quote, "I know Coach Sat is getting a lot of heat right now for plays that he's calling. I think that's unfair to him. He can't go out there and make the plays. That is not his fault." So, right. And there's truth in that. And it's funny because that quote goes out to the public and there's very little pushback from the public about that. It's like, yeah, that's right. Clearly, if that had been said by a member of the media, or if it had just been brought up as a point that wasn't necessarily attributed to your 5-star quarterback, I think there would have been more pushback. Like, yeah, but he doesn't need to call screenplays, 6 out of whatever, or the, not committing to the run game, but there's not a lot of smack talk coming back in Dylan's face in this moment, which, at least Nebraska fans, I guess, know where the line is that they're advised or not advised to cross.
Yeah. And he's right. Like, now the offensive coordinator is responsible for putting the players in position, but ultimately it always, whatever failures or successes that come out of the offense are going to go back to the person who's in charge of the offense, and the quarterback and the OC and the players all share that responsibility. I don't know if it's equally, but they all share that responsibility. Right. So yeah, once we've seen this a million times over, Mitch, once Nebraska fans decide that a coordinator or an assistant coach is just not going to do it for him, it's hard to earn that back. It's hard to come back from that. And unfortunately, I think that's where Marcus Satterfield's at right now.
Is this like Kevin Cosgrove area? Is that the best comp, or is there an offensive guy like Sean Watson who you think that this historically in the last 20 years at Nebraska relates to?
I don't think we've reached Cosgrove level yet. That was pretty rough, but I'm sure like if it's kind of just a thing here, Mitch, like we people pile on the coordinator.
You look for a scapegoat, and the coordinators are easy ones.
Yeah, no doubt. So I don't think it's reached Cosgrove level yet, but I don't know. But we might be trending down that path.
Yeah. All right, let's come back after the break and talk about the other coordinator who doesn't have any of these problems. That's Tony White. We'll get into him next after this. All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nebraska podcast. It is Wednesday. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. Don't forget to submit questions for our Thursday mailbag show. That show can be as good as you, the listeners and the viewers, allow it to be. So send us some good questions. Put them in the comments on this YouTube video. Send them to us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. at gmail.com. Send them to us individually on Twitter. There is an email account. Did I just read the email account? Yes, I believe I did. It's Locked On NEB. I don't know what I'm saying. Connor, why don't you introduce the conversation here about Tony White, since I'm just talking in circles?
Well, he has he has an interesting game in front of him, going up against his alma mater and up against Sean Foster, a guy he's got a relationship with. That hasn't got much chatter this week because we like to look at things from an internal standpoint for Nebraska, and oftentimes we don't like to look at the opponents unless we feel like they're evenly matched. So this is a storyline this week.
Yeah, I wanted to know what he had to say, and I asked Tony about that on Tuesday. And he and Deshaun Foster were teammates for 3 years at UCLA. Foster was a great running back, ended up being a second-round pick, played in the NFL for quite a while before he got into coaching. Tony played in the CFL as a linebacker. He was a 3-year starter. This is like the 98 to 2001 range. Interestingly, Nebraska played its national championship game against Miami in UCLA's home stadium right as Tony White and Deshaun Foster were finishing their senior years in Westwood. So there's a little there's a little crossing of paths historically for to go into this game, but they've stayed in touch. And Tony said that every day of the week except this week, he's cheering for Deshaun Foster and UCLA, his alma mater. And another point about UCLA is that Matt Rhule and Tony White met at UCLA and
That's
probably would not be married in this head coach DC matchup if not for that time. Tony was on his way out, and Rhule came in as a graduate assistant.
Well, there's another piece too. So the larger conversation that we had at the start of the show, Mitch, was like, okay, is this program ready to take off? Is it in a different place now? Are they moving into a different phase of this? I mean, we could ask the same question for the defense. You know, it's been up and down for them a little bit this year. Obviously, they had a higher bar and higher expectations on them. So when they play as poorly as they did against Indiana, you're like, whoa, what happened? So I think you're probably just more likely to say, okay, this is probably a little bit closer to reality. But I think it's been more up and down than people, were expecting this year. So what is the real version of the defense, and what do we find out about them in the final 4 games of the season starting on Saturday?
Well, I think the real defense is definitely the one that we saw throughout the season and Saturday in Columbus. It's not the real defense is not the team that played at Indiana. That was a version of the defense that was affected by all kinds of things that were happening in that game. Credit to Indiana, but it wasn't. That's not what Nebraska is going to be. That's not going to be the calling card in any way for this defense in 2024. I heard on your station 1620 a conversation along these lines, and I was just looking this up. In 2009, Nebraska had the best defense of the last 25 years. You have to go back probably to 99 to get one that is on the same level. 2003 with Bo Pelini was very good, but there were some stinkers in that season that I think discredited that group a bit. They had they forced 47 turnovers, but otherwise it was up and down.
Yeah.
In 2009, this is the Ndamukong Suh defense that nearly decapitated Colt McCoy in the Big 12 championship, that shut out Arizona in the Holiday Bowl. So that defense had a game on October 17th, 2 days, we were 2 days away from the 15-year anniversary of that when Nebraska went to Indiana. 31-10 loss at Texas Tech.
Yep.
So these things happen even to great defenses, and this is a very good one. We'll see what November says about their ability to be great, but this is a very good one that just had a bad day 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. We were making those comparisons to the 2009 defense at the beginning toward the beginning of the season. Like, all right, what's the ceiling for this group? Is it, sort of on that level? That defense is just so different. And you were so willing to believe that one was legit, one of the best, if not the best defenses in the country, because it had the best defensive player in the country,
Sure.
This defense does not. They have to be better than the sum of their parts a little bit, which is fine. And they've, remarkably over 20 games now, it's been basically the same guys shown it pretty consistently that they could play to that level. But it was just, you were more sure about it in 2009 because you're like, yeah, they got that guy,
This is a sum of their parts defense.
Yeah.
That was a holy smokes, look at that dude defense. And it was also a defense that had players at the second level like Dijon Gomes and Eric Hagg and another great pass rusher and Jared Crick, all of whom were all conference caliber players for sure. And this defense, well, I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody.
Great question.
We thought maybe Tommy Hill early in the year, but I don't know if there's anybody who's even in consideration for first team All Big Ten on this.
Gosh, that's a great way to think about it. I don't know that I've really considered that yet as we headed to November now. Some of that is decided in like you get nominated basically by your coach. So I'm sure he'll politic for Ty Robinson and John Bullock. But are
those guys aren't getting it though. They're not getting first team, not in an 18-team Big Ten, not with Oregon and Ohio State and even Michigan has a great defense. Like it's an uphill battle.
Yeah. So, they've been able to do it. Like, so give them credit for that. It's been a long time, and they've been a consistently pretty good defense, just with a couple of blips on the radar, like you mentioned. Even that 2009 defense had a game like that.
The only way you could get first team All Big Ten as a Nebraska defender on a team that finished, say, 7-5 or 8-4 is to have just some stat line that could not be ignored, like a guy with 15 sacks. Like, let's say Jamari Butler had stayed healthy this year and played the way that we saw him play against Ohio State, and a backup left tackle. No, I'm not even going to say that. He's an Ohio State offensive lineman. He's very good, and Jamari played extremely well in that game against Ohio State. If he did that every week, he'd get consideration from a pass rusher spot, or if a guy had 7 interceptions in the secondary, something like that. The way Deshaun Singleton played against Ohio State, where he was like a heat-seeking missile most of the day, I think that might get you consideration if you did it for 12 or 13 games. But
well, you know what's funny, Mitch? Like, Nebraska has one guy whose stats are near the top of the conference on the defensive side of the ball. Malcolm Hartzog has 4 interceptions. It's now he's definitely not an all-conference player. But he's one off of the conference lead in interceptions. He's
impressive. Yeah, he's a magnet for the ball. He was like that as a true freshman, and then he's doing it again here in his 3rd year.
You're right, though. His statistics are going to tell a lot of the story when you get to that at the end of the day. And Nebraska really only has 1 or 2 guys who are like, whoa, those guys are right toward the top of the conference, and in these big picture stats. Nebraska. I'm looking at total tackles right now. Nebraska doesn't have a top 25 tackler in the Big Ten total. Actually, the number 25, Isaac Gifford, has 44 tackles.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just a product of the way that Nebraska rotates on the defensive side. And that's the team that's built for November, that has its top defensive players who are playing 40 snaps or 35 snaps in a game, that they're going to be more fresh when the season comes down to these games that we're walking into. And so I think that's a Tony White thing. Like, he doesn't necessarily go into the season expecting that any of his defensive players are going to be in the top 20 in the league in tackles. Now, if you end up with somebody on your defense who is just, that's, like at times in his career, Luke Reimer was like that, where you notice him during a game and then you look up at the end and he's got 14 tackles.
Yep.
They just don't have a guy like that right now. And they would like to recruit some players like that. But, Barrett Ruud was like that. Mike Brown was like that, to go way back in Nebraska history. But there's not anybody on this defense. They want to be a swarming defense that has 4 hats around the ball all the time, instead of just one guy who's cleaning up with Levante David. He did some of that in his day. So
sure did.
Yeah. Hey, one thing to finish, as we're having this conversation about the defense, went under the radar a little bit when Matt Rhule talked about Tony White on Monday at Rhule's press conference, but he was complimenting White on the job that he did to motivate the Nebraska defense and get them back in the right mindset between Indiana and Ohio State. And Rhule said that's not usually something that coordinators do, that's Rhule's job. Usually it's the motivational stuff. The coordinators are more focused on the X's and O's and the scheme. And he said, that's what head coaches do. This was, again, like an unprompted comment. And, I think an interesting thing for Matt Rhule to say in this UCLA week. Not that, Tony was up for the UCLA job this year. He's not going to be up for it anytime soon, at least not again in 2024. But I just thought it was interesting to hear Rhule again out there promoting Tony White like that.
He does that. He did it at the end of last year, and he'll continue to do so this year. Just politic for his guys to get looks to be coaches and coordinators and things like that. Definitely not out of the ordinary, but we hadn't heard it in a while. So
it was subtle. It was subtle. It's something that they can send the tape to some interested athletic director. Hey, look what Matt Rhule said about his DC back in October when coaching carousel season is here.
All right. That is it for us today. Once again, get those questions in for the mailbag. We will open that thing up tomorrow, whether you want to leave a comment or send an email or send a tweet at us. We will find it whichever way you send it our direction. Appreciate you making this your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On College Football podcast, and you can find the link to that show in the description of this show. You don't have to go far. That is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.